All right. Well, here we are at 9 o'clock, and I think that we can get going. And for those that are still joining us, that they can certainly catch up. And when they do come in, feel free to answer or ask any questions. Um, we are trying a little bit of a different format, so thank you everyone for joining us via Congress Connect. It's an exciting opportunity for us to be able to see how we can pull off additional live events through this great platform. And Heather, for your vision and leadership through the build out of this platform. So thank you very much. So thank you everyone for joining us. As you know, the province of Ontario announced a stay-at-home order, province-wide state of emergency. And so the COVID-19 task force through Landscape Ontario felt it would be in everyone's best interest if we held a question and answer forum this morning, especially since the staff at Landscape Ontario over the last few days have been getting quite a few calls with questions. And so we thought, what better way to address all those questions by getting everybody into a room virtually and answer all of your questions. So we do have our chair, Alan White, for the COVID task force, and our president, Dave Wright, who's also here, and Terry Childs from the task force as well. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free. We'll ask you to use the reactions button to raise your hand. And so if you can do that, once you're called on to ask your question, we'll get you to unmute your microphone, and you'll be able to ask away. And we'll do our absolute best to answer your question or get answers to your question. But for now, I'd like to hand it over to the task force chair, Mr. Alan White.
Good morning, Joe, and thank you very much for hosting this and everybody that's in attendance. As most of you saw, this morning's brand new. The roads weren't too much quieter on my way into work this morning, and those of you that are attending Congress on your drive to the living room probably noticed the same thing. But obviously some new regulations have come through and have been posted in the newspaper as well as on the COVID-19 resource task or COVID-19 resource page on Landscape Ontario, as well as some of the compliance tools that we've been compiling to make it possible, even pre-shutdown right now with the lockdown that was announced for Boxing Day. So really, this is just an extenuation of that lockdown order that came in over the Christmas break. But we thought we would be here and present without going over all the details of that, because I'm sure most of you have read over it. I will say this time, and I think a lot of it has to do with the work that was done in the springtime and the relationships with the provincial government to make sure the landscape sector is known, to make sure that we worked with WSPS and with Sally Harvey's help just to make sure we had good insight and good information moving forward with safety protocols. This go around, unlike spring, landscape and snow removal services and garden centers were specifically identified within the legislation, which makes it a lot clearer for us moving forward. I would say the biggest difference probably for our sector in this new legislation as we've read it, really the biggest clause that's kind of overarching on the entire order is our obligation as employers and businesses to ensure that any employee that can work from home while we go through this, if the work that you're doing is essential and does fall within the parameters of the new guidance, is that we have an obligation that we must ensure that our employees can work remotely. So it's not a matter of if our business is open, everybody can just come in to work. If there isn't a need for them to be on site or in the business itself, we do have an obligation to work towards having them work remotely, either setting up phones at home, computer connections at home, or whatever duties they have that they can do it without traveling around in Ontario. So I think that's the primary gist of it. Dave, if you have anything, or as we see any questions come forward, maybe we could start from there.
Well, I'll just describe what we're doing, if that helps anybody. When they announced this lockdown, I thought, you know what, we need to, I have, I have a snow business as well as landscaping for those that don't know. So snow clearing is obviously an essential service. So I wrote up letters based, well, I had done it beforehand, but the one that was sent out the other night with the task force message, basically stating that snow clearing is an essential service, and I spelled out their names specifically, that they work for Right Landscape, and that they're involved in snow operations, or supporting snow operations, because I have some administrative staff that can't do their job from home all the time. They need to come in to do parts of it, so that they can carry that on, on their person while they're traveling to and from work. And they've been just directed not to be using it to go to their neighbor's house or to go to their friend's house. It's specifically for work. And we do have an open landscape project we're working on right now that was started before the 12th. So we're trying to get that finished. And again, those employees are carrying this letter with them. We also we went back to the letter that we wrote back in the spring, talking about essential work. And my crew trucks all have that in it as well, specifying that what they're doing has been declared an essential service, and that so we've got all that information, so that they are stopped. They've got all the information to lay out to the officer, and then they're directed to call me if there's an issue, because there shouldn't be, but you never know. So they've got all the information they need and the backup from their support from the office to help them through any situations that might arise.
That's awesome, Dave. I see Peter's on as well. Peter's has sat through since spring on the task force, giving us his perspective as a contractor in Toronto. But I do know Peter, and I see you joined us now. Maybe you could share a little bit about the situation in Toronto for any of the contractors on here, because we do have the provincial legislation, but I know in Toronto that Mayor Tory did put a couple of conditions on over the Christmas break. They're a little different. I think Hamilton's the only other one that's close. Most of it relates to the requirement that all employees, wherever possible, it's one per vehicle. That was a Toronto direction as well as Hamilton. But is there any other situations in Toronto that you've noticed that are just a little bit different, or any information you give us to what you're doing with your business in this current lockdown?
Yeah, Toronto has had effectively a lockdown for since Boxing Day. And we are permitted to work on existing projects. I do have one that's on a hotel that is not specifically listed in the orders, and that one we're trying to get clarification on. The general contractor wants to keep working, but obviously priority is to be safe and to keep my staff safe. Personally, I think we're not at a huge risk of getting caught and fined. I think there's enough wiggle room in the orders that if you are on the list and you have a letter like Dave indicated he's done for his staff, there is permission essentially to continue working. But I think the priority is to be safe. And the issue with the one person in the vehicle is it's listed as a recommendation, and it said where possible. And obviously that's going to keep your workers safe. However, I do have one foreman who does not have his driver's license, and I have no choice but to have two people in one of my vehicles. And luckily he is probably one of the most worried of my staff, which makes him the most observant of all of our regulations and protocols. So I suspect that these regulations and this lockdown will scare a lot of people to do the right thing and to keep the masks on and not travel. And I'm hoping that it doesn't have to get any stricter, and that we can keep working as an industry.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that you're right. I think from a legislative standpoint and a compliance standpoint, for our members, for the most part, we should be able to keep doing what we need to do at this time of year, pretty well in all situations, from growers right through to garden centers and even the landscape sector with snow removal obligations. But I think the more critical piece here is we've experienced right from spring, we are rightly and wrongly probably more in the public eye than a lot of businesses. And we have been fortunate in the work that's been created and the work that the members have done to follow as much as they can the safety compliances that have been put forward, both in the operation and in the public eye. So we just encourage that continues as still a certain amount of uncertainty as to where this is going to go with the numbers and how the province is going to react. So we just want to make sure our due diligence and that when we are in the public domain that we are seen as doing what we can to even go beyond what the regulations may call for specifically in writing, but to make sure that our employees are visibly safe and that we're doing our part to follow all the recommendations that have been put forward, whether they're legislated or just a recommendation. Anybody else in the task force? John, I see you're on the call as well. And you operate one of our larger distribution businesses and associate. Any thoughts as your operations are coming into this stay-at-home order?
Yeah, I think it's just mimicking everything you just said, Alan. Be as safe as possible and follow the guidelines to a T. We all know that they're going to be out there ticketing and being strict. I just don't want our profession to be hit the hardest, right? So I think in terms of protective gear, masks, and social distancing, just follow all the guidelines that have been set out by public health. In terms of the supply end of things, it's back to curbside pickup and ensuring that all the customers are placing their orders online and calling them in prior to arrival to site, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that they've really narrowed down is making sure that those calls for curbside pickup are prior to coming to site, because I don't think they want many of the public gathering in a parking lot placing orders, which I think was one of the issues first time around.
Right. I think that's a big thing we're hearing from the government is workplace community spread is probably one of the largest areas next to social spread. And most of it happens within the workplace. So I think when a remote and out in the field is not the issue, it's, to your point, John, it's in the congregation areas, whether it's customer connection points. But even that, from what we're learning, is a fairly slow transmission. It's more lunchrooms, people carpooling to work, kind of letting their guard down in the off hours when they punch out. So it's being cognizant, I think, having communication with our teams that when they are interacting, that's as critically important as when they're actually performing their job. So again, I think we all have an obligation to communicate to our team members how everything from leaving their house and the safety of that bubble under the stay-at-home order all the way through to completing what's required of them in their job and then back meets all the requirements of the ministry. I think that's where the ministry, both at the provincial level and the municipal level, are going to be watching us as businesses to make sure that we don't let our guard down in those instances. Anybody else in the task force have any comments they want to add? There's a big list of people on the top. It's hard to catch all of them. Terry, I know you've been fairly active in keeping an eye on things. Do you have anything you want to add?
Sorry, Alan. Have we covered the letter that we've distributed to the profession?
We did on the
for driving with more than one person. Have we discussed that?
Yeah, Dave shared with what his company's doing, and on the COVID task force resource page, there's templates there. And I would encourage everybody to go check it. Another thing I have noted when I've been talking to members is some of the compliance rules. So on top of just having a letter to go to and from work for your employees, if you haven't been paying attention or caught all the details in between what the Ministry of Labor requirements are, and Sally, if I miss anything, please fill in the blanks after. It is now a requirement of the employer to ensure they have contact tracing of all employees or visitors that enter the workplace. Joe has made a really helpful template that's on the resource page. Some may notice that it's a Google template, so that can be used electronically as well as it can be used in printed form. The electronic version is actually, if it's used in the Google format, that it's presented on the resource page. it is super helpful when you move it all across to your Google Drive, because it also has the spreadsheets built into the back. And those that have computer savvy employees within their company can, as we have in ours with my younger team, have created a QR code that goes on all doors and in all emails that go out to anybody that's coming to the workplace, that allows them to access that on their cellular phone. So before they even arrive at our place of work, they fill out the form digitally. As soon as they complete it, it automatically instructs them if they can attend our place of business or not, and it saves it on our Google Drive in a Google Sheets. So we have a record of all people that come to and from our workplace and what their COVID symptoms are. So that's one of the compliance. The other is you have to have a written policy in the workplace as to how your employees will conduct themselves and how you will comply with the regulations to make your workplace safe for your employees. That has to be present and on hand in the event anyone shows up from enforcement to inspect your place of business, as well as masking, face shields, or plexiglass dividers in the event that you can't be more than 6 feet away from any person with or without a mask. And I think the third one, there was one more. What am I missing, Sally?
Sorry, I'm just responding to Tony's question about the safety plan. So masks, distancing, and just staying home if you're ill.
Hand washing is going to be.
Washing of hands, sanitizing, absolutely, yes. Good, thanks. Thanks, Peter.
Do written policies have to be present on a job site as well, Alan?
Yes. I don't know if they have. I would err on the caution of the safety policy when you have remote crews. I would suggest that that policy be kept in each vehicle. As we've always dealt with Ministry of Labor, a work site is wherever the worker is. So landscape is pretty common. It's not at an office. That each of your vehicles has a copy of that plan with them.
I've just responded about the safety plan as well. So we have the policies, but we also have a safety plan, a COVID safety plan that's now legislated because we're in shutdown or lockdown. So this is required of all businesses that are open. If you're not open, you do not have to have one. But yes, to answer Tony's question, trucks and remote job sites are considered workplaces. And it can even be asked to be seen by a customer. So John, if somebody did a pre-order, picked it up, and suddenly they wanted to see it, that would hopefully not be a paper copy you'd produce, but something that you would produce to your customer base online. Just to
Thank you, Sally.
Okay, thanks.
If I can just add on to that, if anyone has people driving their own vehicles between work sites, make sure they have that information with them as well, because their own vehicle could be looked at potentially as being a work site. So for the sake of an extra little bit of paperwork, it just keeps everyone clean.
And you do have an obligation. Oh, that's what the extra piece was. We do have an obligation now under the new order. Training is a big piece of it. So it's not just okay to provide everybody with a policy. Particularly if you have anybody that speaks a different language within your workplace, it's imperative that you train them on what those procedures are and how to wash their hands, how to use masks, when the different requirements do come into call. As well as you have to identify if your business, because normally a business is under 5 employees, 15 employees don't require a designated go-to person for safety. You can have it as an ad hoc within your business. Under COVID regulation, you have to have a safety coordinator that's, if the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Labor is the point person that deals with this compliance and would be the liaison for the ministry to have conversations with your workplace. So I think those were the big differences. I know that's in Toronto and Hamilton. I'm not 100% sure, maybe Sally, you can correct me, if that's required of the whole province. I think, I'm pretty sure
it is right now that we're in this situation. And I think it really bodes well for us all to look at all of our health and safety policies and procedures. And Alan, you mentioned a good thing. Even before COVID, we were responsible to communicate, so develop a policy and train and continuously evaluate whether those policies are being followed and what changes need to be made. So as long as we're making those changes to our policies within the requirements of the government, that'll be great. And that safety plan template, I think we've got both a template from the Government of Ontario on our COVID Task Force website hub, as well as one from EIO Solutions, Tony. There are 2 templates there that will help all of us develop those safety plans, but do personalize them as well within the confines of the legislation so that it's relevant to your staff, and do walk them through it and do practice it and train it, as Alan said.
And you're allowed to amend those to suit your workplace.
Correct.
You can't water them down, but you can certainly make them, and we encourage you to make them applicable to your workplace. If there's any unique situations or anything that differentiates that, that's critical that you go through that process. To Sally's point, it really needs to be a tailored document to your workplace and your workforce.
And remember, a workplace is a truck, and a trailer and a remote site. And I will remind everybody too, Alan had raised this a couple of weeks ago when the announcement came on for lockdown or the shutdown on December 26th. A new legislative piece came in around face shields, if you remember, Alan. And just to clarify that, we are required to wear masks at all times. And if we are in an audience or an area where other people may not be wearing their masks correctly, we are required to add either safety goggles, eye protection, and or a face shield over the mask. So mask plus safety goggles or eye protection, and or mask and visor.
Or a plexiglass divider.
Barrier is fine as well. You're correct. Yeah. But if the worker were out snow, let's say we're snow performing snow removal, we're on a city sidewalk or a condominium corporation sidewalk, and others are walking around with the mask under their nose or above their chin, that's when we are required as employers to make sure our staff are safe. And the intention of those devices, PPE devices, are to make sure our staff are safe in the event that somebody else is not wearing correctly. Okay.
Safety glasses there's a question from Brian Cox, glasses, eye protection. If there's safety glasses with the goggles, is my understanding, goggles or face shield.
They're looking at the side protection, Brian. And actually we have a contract where we have to wear the mask and the visors at all, face shields at all times. You do get used to it. It's a little tricky taking a glass of water, but you do get used to it. And it seems a little crazy at one point, but there are disposable ones. We reuse them and they are very comfortable to use. So don't hesitate to get them. And they're available on the market.
Sally, the face shield is more practical if you're working outside as well, because glasses get fogged up when they're wearing a mask. So the face shield seems to be more practical. And
I wear glasses and a mask and a face shield. So I'm in that. It can be a challenge, but get the ones that don't fog up. They're anti-fog versions of face shields to purchase. So those are good investment.
A big part of it, again, is the safety training. So in retail or some of our associate members, it's hard because you have points of sale or cash or where you're transferring the product, but it's a good training point for our teams when they're in field operations, working as a crew. One, to stay away from the public. Even if someone approaches you, make sure you keep that 6-foot buffer and with fellow employees. So you make the face shields available as a requirement if you get within that bubble, but most employees will want to err on, I don't want to wear the face shield, so I'm going to make sure I stay 6 feet away from everybody. If you don't go through that training, you will see human behavior will kick in and then everybody tends to congregate. So that's, again, I think why it's critically important. It's not just to have the policy and to have the tools there, but to go through the training so they understand how to apply it in the real world.
Hey, Alan, I'd like to hear from Perry Groby or Terry Vandercook specifically about garden center best practices. So if we can put them on the spot.
I didn't know we were allowed to do that. That's Terry?
Perry, all you have to do is unmute and we'll spotlight you.
Yes, good morning all.
Good morning.
There's Perry. Okay.
I didn't want to scare the children, so I left the video off this morning. So
that's all right.
Best practices, at least in terms of what we've been trying to do, is we've been trying very hard to reduce the amount of time that we're actually physically here. And this time of year, that's not so hard to do. We are concerned a little bit with this whole process is the fact that it's one thing for the month of February, but if some of this is still extended into April, that could be catastrophic for the kind of operations that we have. So my reticence a little bit with some of what they've proposed is largely what happens if. We've already had a history right now with this past year about the uncertainty of things back in March. And what we really don't need is to have it like this again come this spring. So I mean, trying to comply in the best way we can. I know our biggest concern back last spring was trying to keep the control of customers and spacing the customers. And I think if I had to make an observation, I think those that are larger merchandisers, the big problem they have is they're not really doing such a great job of that. And that, I think, is probably the reason why things have been, if you look at the way that the guidelines have been written, there are certainly much more stringent things where their operations are concerned than there were before. And, you know, that's, I think, not such a bad thing. In terms of, I have to say, last night's email regarding the letter to take the staff and such, I think was a very excellent and timely one. I'm glad that we received that when we did. So I'll let smarter guy than me, if Terry wants to chime in, he certainly can.
Terry's unmuting, hopefully. Great point, Perry. And I think this is something the task force talked about earlier this week, to your point about extension past February. We are obviously in a very difficult situation from the Premier's standpoint and the public health standpoint to make sure our hospital numbers come down, because they are reaching capacity. And if it gets worse, it's not going to help any of us. But part of what we're looking at is, you're right, spring is our real critical crunch point. And a little bit of this is learning what we can from last year from each other. And we'll be working on that as a task force to try and bring that through. As Scott and I have talked about podcasts and other short bits between now and spring to bring new and current innovative ideas forward, but really prepare for next spring in the event this does continue. What does it look like to operate our businesses? How do we take advantage of this time to implement things that we learned from last summer to make sure we're ready? In a perfect world, hopefully all this turns around and that's not a requirement of operations come April. But in the event it doesn't happen until the vaccines get broadly circulated enough to make a significant difference, how can we prepare our businesses to be most ready? So there might be a lot of learning opportunity. You're right. The Premier has made a point of big box stores and their compliance with proper distancing within the operations and how that will happen. Traffic flow is something we heard a lot of growers, retailers in the garden center sector were having issue with curbside because their businesses weren't initially designed to handle that. So maybe that's something we can spend some time thinking about over the winter. How could we handle that different versus trying to do it in the middle of the April rush? So let's see what we can learn from the next 4 weeks with retail and how they're complying and what happens with the regulation. And we'll do our best to stay on top of it, as well as work with the retail council. We do have some contacts there just to see how they're pivoting, how they're working with compliance. In worst case scenario, we're as best prepared as we can. In best case scenario, this all goes away and the restrictions come off well before spring. Terry, did you get a chance to unmute?
Terry Vanderkrook doesn't have a mic.
Oh, sorry.
I did want to add on to what you were just talking about. And I think we, the rest of us, non-retail, non-garden centers, this is typically a time we're going over budgets and planning for the next season. I think we need to take that same step and look at, if this doesn't change, how does our season unroll? Do we have access to washrooms? Do we have all the PPE? Do we have all the protocols in place? Rather than wait, middle of April, suddenly find out that things are as bad as last year. And then we're starting to scramble to get supplies and everything else.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. Peter or Dave, do you have any comment on Tim's question? How about design build focused companies not in the snow industry? I believe being state and landscape services are allowed, permits those companies to continue operations at this time. Anything you're looking at for spring or, as Terry said, preparation Worst case scenario, best case scenario with this.
I think looking at Tim's question directly, which is for design build companies, are you allowed to work right now? Basically, that's paraphrasing. I would, they're referring to snow clearing and landscape services. So, but they don't define what landscape services are. I think that's one of those situations where you have to make a judgment call. Certainly in my business, we're looking at it as residential construction, as opposed to in my design build end of things. And so we have projects that are open. We're going to finish those, but we're not going to start anything. And that's just over the winter. Going into the spring, we'll take another look at things. Hopefully, and I think as a task force, we need to get some definition on what landscape services are. Are they talking maintenance? Are they talking construction? They're not specifying that. At this time of the year, I don't think it makes a huge difference. People that are working, they've got projects that are open, so let's get them finished and do what we're supposed to do and get this pandemic locked down.
We're in the same place as you, Dave, where we have some open projects that under the construction regulations are permitted to continue. And again, it's about making sure those sites are safe, because if there are any COVID cases on your sites, the city of Toronto, in my jurisdiction, will come down hard on us. I know you have to notify, it's one of the requirements. And I believe if there's 2 cases, then in your workplace, then you will get a visit and you will have to answer to the inspection. So I think for us right now is to make sure we stay as safe as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. That is a new requirement in the city of Toronto. If you have 2 cases in your workplace, you have an obligation to notify public health that you've had 2 cases within your workplace. And then again, that's where you need that liaison that's identified individual with your policies and public health can work with to investigate and make sure that all conditions are being met, so that obviously to protect the rest of your workforce and for them to deal with workplace outbreaks. There was a question here from Jake Hudson about interior maintenance as it relates to landscape services. In my belief, to the best of my knowledge, unless anybody differs, that landscape maintenance, interior, exterior, obviously the protocols that would apply to interior spaces would apply here. But I would consider, since you're looking after like growers and everybody else, plant material, the same rules would apply. And then Jeff Olson's on the call here, and he's been a big contributor to the task force. Jeff, do you have any comments for any growers that are on the call here about what you've been experiencing and how the new rules apply to your operations?
We put out a new safety policy last night just for any growers that are out there, but just including the new protocols in terms of the face shields, which has been a couple of weeks, but we wanted to put the hammer down starting last night. Of course, letters for employees and then the masks all the time, everywhere. So that's something that is, again, driving to work. Okay, a couple things. Driving to work this morning, the traffic was absolutely no different than it was yesterday. So everybody be prepared that this is going to be locked down harder than it is right now, because people are just going, well, if I get a letter from my, of course I'm essential. And so if I get a letter from my employer, then I'm fine. And so that's what everybody's doing, just keep working. But again, driving by crews this morning, nobody had masks on outside. That is the new recommendation that came out in the latest thing. So I would, in our operation, we've been complying with that, but we're gonna stay focused on it. And I would suggest that everybody as well do that. We have other issues with temporary foreign workers that are challenged to come in because of this new rule around testing before you arrive in the country. A lot of our folks are from rural areas in third world countries, so it's they don't have access to testing. So we're trying as an industry to somehow get that waived, or they're coming into mandatory isolation anyway when they get here. So we're working on that. Just yeah, that's the basis of it. And I think for the whole industry, as I mentioned in the chat there, let's as a task force just keep advocating. We have lots of time now. It's the middle of January. Last year we got hit with this in the beginning of April. We've got time to advocate at all levels of government and of course PR campaign out there to make sure that our members can work this spring.
Yeah, no, those are great comments, Jeff. And I think that's, as business owners, we all deal with risk management to some extent in our business planning and budgeting, best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. But I think you bring a good point. And something the task force is our bi-weekly, we still continue to meet twice a week. And if this ramps up, particularly as we look at spring, we may meet more often, but we'll decide that based on the demand of the information and the rate that's coming forward. But a real point that we're dealing with and trying to keep an eye on is, what are the behavior mechanisms that the government's dealing with, trying to stay one step ahead of it. We've been watching this and having communication with the government since March, April. So we're starting to be able to anticipate next moves. But your point's well taken, Jeff. And a little bit as expected, there's a little bit of fatigue, obviously, both in our own operations and business, even with our own families. So seeing this morning's traffic in the Greater Toronto area was a little concerning, very different than April was in May, but the numbers are significantly higher. So seeing that, knowing that, and we'll be watching what's happening with public health, but there is an anticipation, if things don't get better, they're going to get worse. If they get worse, the government's going to be forced. That this all comes down to, it's not whether I get infected or my employees get infected, our hospitals are at capacity. They have to bring that down and free up so that people in motor vehicle accidents, cancer patients, heart attacks, strokes, all those other things that happen in day-to-day life can be dealt with. So in the event that we don't see behavior in our own environments, we need to anticipate how do we operate in future steps. At the same time as complying with what's happening, do our best. So that's why it doesn't hurt to go wherever you can a little bit beyond it to do our part, to make sure we can do whatever we can to ensure that come April, through advocacy or other things, one, that we're prepared and that we're essential, two, that the numbers are going in the right direction. Or this will get extended past February into March and help us all if it extends into April again. Because I don't know how much more hit everybody can take. So let's figure out how to operate our businesses in a lockdown. We have a lot more lead time than we did in April, May last year. But we also have to deal with realities as we manage the risk in our businesses to make sure we're prepared both from our own survivability as a business, so we're there for our customers and for our employees, but at the same time, whatever we can to have a viable business so that our employees can come to work and provide a service for which they can support their families too. So there's a lot of things obviously at play, and a lot of consideration goes in from the task force members, and I'm grateful that they meet with us twice a week and continue to do so, along with Tony's team at Landscape Ontario. That's been essential in bringing us the day-to-day news. And as you see, a lot of the resources that go to the page, that happens many times overnight. So the team that participates from our communication team and web team, they take that information after hours because we meet at 4:30, and by the time we get up the next morning, it's already there for the rest of the membership. So that's been beneficial to all of us. And again, while I have her here, thank you to Tony and your team. Even coming into Congress right now, I know how much preparation goes into normal Congress. I can't imagine virtuals any easier. So since it's our first time around. But thanks, Jeff, for that. We don't need to, but anybody can reach out to the task force. I know Jeff's kind of watching really closely in part of the communication, and he's advocating for it. Foreign workers in the grower sectors is a big deal and vital to their operations, which will be starting to ramp up in the coming months. So he's working hard. And if you have any specific questions or looking for information, please feel free to reach out to us via email. All of our contact information is on the COVID resource task page. We just click on the task force members. Feel feel free to ask any of us questions as you go through in your own businesses, specific questions that might come up through the year. But I know that's going to be a big one for your group within the Growers Network. Jeff, if you can provide any assistance there, because there's a lot of questions coming forward, especially as we bring or try to bring foreign workers into the country in the coming months with the new federal and provincial compliance. Any questions coming out?
I have a quick comment, Alan.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to throw out a reminder there to everyone who has staff working at home, any managers or business owners, any leaders, just to be in touch with your employees, make that phone call, maybe have a quick Zoom meeting. I think it's important to still continue with that face-to-face or keep those open lines of communication. It really helps with any issues that they might be having going on. I think mental health is going to start setting in for a few people now that the stay-home order is become a lot more strict. So it will definitely aid with a little bit of anxiety. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I think that's critically important, and thanks for bringing that up. We're going to host a couple town halls in the coming weeks and months to deal specifically with that. I encourage everybody, both in your own companies, take advantage. I've been working with Joe and Tony on our professional development. Take advantage of just signing your employees up for some extra training. We're trying to make as many tools available through virtual platform. It just really kind of breaks some of the monotony, keeps your employees engaged and thinking about the right things. Because turn on the news or sit at home all day, it can be really hard on us all mentally. As we know as business owners, that stress of everything we deal with normally, but it's also probably more stressful for your employees because they don't have control, like many of us do, over the situation that we don't even have control over. So anything we can do to mitigate that, as Bell always says, let's talk. I think that's critically important. If you can just grab a Zoom. I know in our company right now, both our office staff and our production staff, we are having weekly training sessions on our own through Zoom, just to allow all our team members to come together, see each other face to face, and have a conversation. So it's been pretty helpful. And we even throw the odd social thing into it, or send something home, or have one of our team members drop off at everybody's place a little something, whether it's a training tool, some company swag, a coffee pack, or something like that, just to keep them all kind of in the right spirit. Thanks, John, for sharing that. There's a comment here from Paul just about the compliance and non-compliance. I know we've dealt with that in the spring. We call it members eating members. Hopefully that doesn't come to fruition again. Hopefully that we have enough lead time and we have enough of these ongoing dialogues that we can really kind of, through suggestion and solutions, come up with ways around that. Non-compliance usually comes out of panic and not having the ability to pivot. So hopefully this year, with all this lead time and conversation, that won't be the case, and companies will be a lot more ready to deal with whatever variable we do have going on our side. We work outdoors, we can space apart. There's so many things going for us, as long as we remain compliant and we keep that in the forefront. The second we start getting into bad business practices, bad compliance, and bad public health perceptions, that's where we get into trouble. So we'll always have bad apples within that reality, but hopefully those stand out as standalones, even if they're within the Landscape Ontario family, and they'll be held accountable for what they don't comply with. But I think as a community, and through the task force and everything else, and through our own safety procedures, we use the resources on Landscape Ontario's resource page, and we take advantage of Tony's team, Sally, Leslie Sisson, that's on the call from HR and labor relations at the national level, and working with Employment Canada. We take their resources and utilize those to the best of our ability. We should be a lot more prepared for that come spring, and I don't think it's ever a good thing where it gets into policing each other. So let's work on compliance. Let's work on peer pressure. And if you know a landscaper, feel free, to John's comment too, feel free, maybe more so this winter than in previous years, to reach out to some of your competitors, peers in the network, see how they're doing, see how you can help them. Because if we all come together, we will all come through this in whatever variable gets thrown at us in April, way better and way easier than we would otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Alan. We are at 9:45, and I know there are some conference sessions starting at 9:45 in Congress Connect. So I think this might be a good jumping off point. Unless anyone has any other questions, we'll definitely feel free to stick around. But just want to say thank you to the entire Landscape Ontario COVID-19 Task Force for mobilizing this morning. All of the great information that you all shared, the resources that include the changes for the stay-at-home order are on the Landscape Ontario Resource Hub. So I have posted that link a couple of times, and I'll post it again just before we wrap. But I think this will be a good point to start heading off to those conferences, conference sessions. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time. I hope you are staying positive while testing negative. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, guys.